What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected young actors walks into what should be a routine promotional interview, only to discover that the host has prepared a character assassination based on jealousy and career frustration? Bill Skarsgård thought he was appearing on Jimmy Kimmel Live to discuss his latest film and share some insights about his craft. Instead, he found himself facing a bitter comedian who had apparently been waiting years to tear down someone whose talent made his own limitations painfully obvious. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because what you're about to witness will expose the ugliest side of late-night television. The backstage area at Jimmy Kimmel Live buzzed with typical pre-show energy as Bill Skarsgård prepared for what he assumed would be another standard promotional appearance. At 33, the Swedish actor had become one of Hollywood's most sought-after talents, seamlessly moving between blockbuster horror films and critically acclaimed dramas. His transformation into Pennywise had made him internationally famous, but his range went far beyond that iconic role. Bill had done the show before, and while he had never developed a particularly close relationship with Jimmy, their previous interactions had been professional and respectful. There was no reason to expect anything different tonight. His publicist had briefed him on the usual talking points: his new film, his process as an actor, maybe some stories about working with various directors. Standard late-night fare that would help promote his work while entertaining the audience. As he sat in makeup, Bill ran through some potential anecdotes in his mind. He was naturally introspective, more comfortable discussing his craft than engaging in the kind of superficial banter that often defined these appearances. But he understood the game, understood that promoting his work meant being accessible to audiences who might not otherwise seek out his more challenging films. The makeup artist finished her work while Bill adjusted his suit jacket, a simple but elegant choice that reflected his understated personal style. He had never been one for flashy appearances or attention-seeking behavior. His approach to fame was measured and thoughtful, much like his approach to acting itself. Walking onto the stage, Bill was greeted by the usual enthusiastic applause from an audience that clearly recognized and appreciated his work. He waved modestly, his natural shyness evident even as he smiled warmly at the crowd. Taking his seat across from Jimmy, he settled in with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Bill Skarsgård, everyone," Jimmy announced, but there was something in his tone that felt different from their previous encounters. Where there had once been professional courtesy, there now seemed to be an undercurrent of something less pleasant. "Thanks for being here tonight, Bill." "Thank you for having me, Jimmy," Bill replied in his distinctively accented English, his voice carrying that thoughtful quality that had become part of his public persona. "So let's talk about your new movie," Jimmy began, but his posture suggested this wasn't going to be the straightforward promotional interview Bill had anticipated. Another challenging role, another opportunity to show off that incredible range everyone keeps talking about. Bill felt a slight chill at the way Jimmy emphasized incredible range, as if the phrase itself was somehow suspicious or overblown. "Well, I try to choose projects that interest me, that challenge me as a performer." "Challenge you," Jimmy repeated, his voice carrying what was starting to sound like mockery. "That's interesting, Bill, because I've been watching your work, and I have to ask, how much of what you do is really acting, and how much is just weird for the sake of being weird?" The question hit Bill like an unexpected slap. In all his years of interviews, through all the discussions of his craft and his choices, no one had ever reduced his work to something so dismissive and reductive. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something was off about this interaction. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that," Bill replied carefully, his natural politeness masking his growing confusion and concern. "What I mean is that you've built this reputation as this serious, intense actor. But when you really look at it, most of your memorable performances are just you making scary faces and doing creepy voices. How is that serious acting?" Bill stared at Jimmy, in disbelief. This wasn't professional criticism or even constructive questioning. This was a deliberate attempt to minimize and mock everything he had worked to achieve as an artist. "Jimmy, I think you're mischaracterizing my work," Bill said, his voice remaining calm despite the growing tension he felt. "Yes, I've done horror films, but I've also done drama, comedy, independent films. I try to approach each role with the same level of commitment and preparation." "Commitment and preparation," Jimmy laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Bill, you played a clown that eats children. How much preparation could that possibly require, beyond learning how to look scary?" The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. This wasn't the usual late-night banter that audiences expected. This was something much more personal and deliberately cruel, and it was happening to someone who had never given any indication of deserving such treatment. "That's incredibly reductive," Bill replied, his composure beginning to show cracks. "Creating a character like Pennywise involved months of research, physical preparation, psychological exploration. It's not just about looking scary. Psychological exploration?" Jimmy repeated mockingly. "You mean figuring out how to be creepy on camera? Because that seems to be your specialty, doesn't it, Bill? Playing freaks and weirdos and damaged people." Bill felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just criticism of his work anymore. This was a personal attack disguised as professional commentary. "Jimmy, I'm not sure why you're being so hostile, but those characters you're dismissing represent some of the most challenging and rewarding work I've ever done." "Challenging," Jimmy scoffed. "Bill, you're Swedish. You have an accent. You're tall and thin and you have an interesting face. Hollywood needed someone who could look creepy, and you fit the bill. How much of your success is really talent, and how much is just genetic lottery?" The audience was now visibly uncomfortable, some looking around nervously as if expecting someone to intervene. This had moved far beyond entertainment into something that felt genuinely cruel and unprofessional. "Genetic lottery?" Bill's voice was rising slightly, his natural reserve finally beginning to crack under the sustained assault. "Jimmy, that's incredibly insulting. You're reducing my entire career to physical appearance." "Am I wrong, though?" Jimmy pressed, leaning forward with predatory intensity. "Take away the accent, the height, the unusual features, and what's left? What makes Bill Skarsgård special, besides looking like he stepped out of a Tim Burton movie?" Bill felt something fundamental shift inside him. This wasn't just professional disagreement anymore. This was systematic humiliation, and it was coming from someone who had no apparent reason to attack him so viciously. "You know what, Jimmy? I don't know what this is really about, but I'm not going to sit here and let you tear down my work and my character for your entertainment," Bill said, his voice now carrying real edge. "Your character?" Jimmy's laugh was sharp and bitter. "That's rich, Bill. Tell me, what character is that exactly? The mysterious foreign actor? The serious artist? Or just another pretty face who got lucky in Hollywood?" The words hung in the air like poison, and Bill Skarsgård felt every defense he had carefully constructed around his career and his sense of self begin to crumble. This wasn't just unprofessional anymore. It was cruel in a way that seemed designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Pretty face who got lucky. Bill's voice carried a combination of hurt and growing anger that was completely unlike his usual measured demeanor. "Jimmy, do you have any idea how insulting that is? Do you know anything about my background, my training, the work I've put into developing my craft?" "Your craft," Jimmy repeated with obvious disdain. "Right. The craft of looking menacing on camera? Very sophisticated stuff, Bill." "You're being deliberately obtuse," Bill replied, his Swedish accent becoming more pronounced as his composure slipped. "Acting isn't just about how you look. It's about understanding human psychology, about finding truth in fictional circumstances, about serving the story." Jimmy leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Serving the story? You know what I think you're really serving, Bill? Your own ego. This whole serious artist persona you've cultivated. The accusation was so fundamentally wrong, so contrary to everything Bill believed about himself and his approach to his work, that he almost didn't know how to respond. My ego? Jimmy, I've never claimed to be anything other than someone who tries to do good work. Good work? Jimmy laughed mockingly. Is that what we're calling horror movie performances now? Good work? You made faces at a camera while wearing clown makeup, Bill. That's not Hamlet. Bill felt his famous reserve finally beginning to crack. Completely. You know what, Jimmy? You're right. It's not Hamlet. It's something different. Something that required its own set of skills and challenges. But apparently you're not interested in understanding that. Oh, I understand perfectly, Jimmy replied with vicious satisfaction. I understand that you've convinced a lot of people that doing weird characters makes you some kind of serious actor when really you're just exploiting your natural oddness. Natural oddness? Bill stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The audience gasped, sensing that whatever professional courtesy had remained was now completely gone. Sit down, Bill, Jimmy commanded, his voice carrying an authority that revealed something ugly about his personality. We're not finished talking. Yes, we are, Bill replied firmly, his voice now carrying decades of accumulated dignity and self-respect. This isn't talking, Jimmy. This is you attacking me for reasons I don't understand. Jimmy also stood, moving, around his desk with predatory confidence. Attacking you? I'm asking you honest questions about your career. If you can't handle that, maybe you're not as serious an actor as you pretend to be. Pretend to be? Bill's voice was now carrying real anger, something his fans rarely got to see. Jimmy, I don't pretend to be anything. I work hard, I respect my colleagues, I try to bring something meaningful to every role I take. The studio was electric with tension. This wasn't just a professional disagreement anymore, it was a fundamental clash between someone who took his craft seriously and someone who seemed determined to tear that seriousness down. Something meaningful, Jimmy repeated sarcastically. What's meaningful about playing a child-eating clown, Bill? What deep artistic truth were you exploring there? The truth about fear, Bill replied with sudden intensity. The truth about childhood trauma, about how evil disguises itself, about the power of imagination to both create and destroy. But you wouldn't understand that because you only see the surface. Jimmy's face darkened at the implication that he lacked depth or understanding. I see just fine, Bill. I see an actor who's gotten very good at marketing his weirdness as artistic vision. Marketing my weirdness? Bill was incredulous. Jimmy, what are you talking about? I've never marketed anything. I do interviews when I'm contractually obligated to. I show up to premieres when required, and I spend the rest of my time working or living my life privately. Privately? Jimmy scoffed. Right, the mysterious recluse act. Very calculated, very designed to make you seem more interesting than you actually are. Bill stared at Jimmy in growing disbelief. Every aspect of his personality, every choice he made about how to conduct his career and his life, was being twisted into something calculated and false. You think being private is an act? Bill asked, his voice now carrying genuine hurt along with anger. You think wanting to keep some part of myself separate from public consumption is calculation? In Hollywood? Everything is calculation, Bill. The only difference is that some people are honest about it. Honest about what? Bill demanded, his voice rising as his famous control finally began to slip completely. About the fact that they're selling a product, Jimmy replied with cruel satisfaction. About the fact that their public persona is designed to maximize their career opportunities. You've just gotten very good at selling authenticity as your brand. The accusation was so fundamentally misunderstanding of who Bill was as a person that it left him momentarily speechless. Selling authenticity? Jimmy, authenticity isn't something you sell, it's something you either have or you don't. And you think you have it? Jimmy challenged. I think I try to be honest about who I am and what I do, Bill replied, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. Honest? Jimmy's laugh was bitter and revealing. Bill, you've built your entire career on playing characters that are as far from normal human beings as possible. How is that honest? Because those characters contain human truth, Bill said with passionate conviction. Because even the most extreme fictional creation can reveal something real about the human experience. That's what acting is about, Jimmy. Finding the humanity in every role, no matter how unusual. Jimmy's expression grew even uglier at Bill's passionate defense of his craft. The humanity, right? Tell me, Bill, what humanity did you find in playing a demonic clown? The humanity of someone consumed by rage and pain, Bill replied without hesitation. The humanity of someone who's lost all connection to empathy and love. It's still human, Jimmy, just human at its worst. The response clearly caught Jimmy off guard, revealing the depth of thought and preparation that went into Bill's work. But instead of acknowledging this, he doubled down on his attacks. Very philosophical, Jimmy said mockingly. But at the end of the day, you're still just a guy who got famous for looking scary in a horror movie. If that's all you can see in my work, then this conversation is pointless, Bill replied, his voice now carrying a weight of disappointment that was somehow more devastating than anger. The disappointment in Bill's voice seemed to hit Jimmy harder than any angry response could have, and his face contorted with an emotion that looked almost like shame before quickly transforming back into rage. He had expected to break Bill down, to force him into defensive anger, but instead he was facing someone whose dignity remained intact despite the sustained assault. Pointless? Jimmy's voice cracked slightly. You think this conversation is pointless because I'm not kissing your ass like everyone else in Hollywood? I think this conversation is pointless because you're not actually interested in having a conversation, Bill replied with devastating calm. You're interested in tearing someone down for reasons that have nothing to do with me or my work. The accusation landed with surgical precision, and Jimmy's professional composure finally began to crack completely. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, Bill. I'm not one of your creepy characters. No, you're not, Bill agreed quietly. My characters, even the villains, usually have some underlying motivation that makes sense. I'm having trouble understanding. Yours? The audience was riveted, watching a moral reckoning unfold in real time. Jimmy had clearly expected to dominate this confrontation, but Bill's refusal to be broken down was turning the tables in ways that were making the host look smaller and more petty with each exchange. My motivation is simple, Jimmy said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. I'm tired of watching mediocre actors get praised as geniuses just because they're willing to do weird stuff on camera. Mediocre actors, Bill repeated thoughtfully. Is that what you think I am, Jimmy? Because if so, I have to wonder why you invited me on your show. Do you usually dedicate airtime to people whose work you don't respect? The question exposed the fundamental contradiction in Jimmy's behavior, and he had no good answer for it. His silence only made his motivations seem more suspect and personal. You want to know what I really think happened here tonight? Bill continued, his voice gaining strength from his moral certainty. I think you've been waiting for an opportunity to attack me, and you decided to use your platform to do it. Attack you? Jimmy's laugh was hollow and desperate. I'm asking you legitimate questions about your career. No, you're not, Bill replied with quiet conviction. You're trying to humiliate me on national television, and I can't figure out why. Have I done something to offend you personally? Have I hurt you in some way I'm not aware of? Jimmy had no answer for that question, and his silence was more revealing than any response could have been. The studio was completely quiet now, the audience sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television. Because if I have hurt you somehow, I genuinely apologize, Bill continued, his voice carrying sincere concern. But if this is just about professional jealousy or personal frustration, then you're using your power in a way that's beneath both of us. The mention of professional jealousy hit Jimmy like a physical blow, and his face flushed red with rage, and what might have been recognition of an uncomfortable truth. Professional jealousy? Jimmy's voice was barely controlled. You think I'm jealous of you? I think you're angry about something, and you've decided I'm a safe target for that anger, Bill replied with devastating insight. I think you see someone who's found success and respect in a field you've never been able to break into, and that bothers you. The psychological accuracy of the observation was clearly hitting home, and Jimmy's response revealed just how close to the truth Bill had come. I don't want to break into acting, Bill. I'm perfectly happy with my career. Are you? Bill asked quietly. Because happy people don't usually spend their time trying to tear down others who are pursuing their dreams successfully. Jimmy stared at him for a long moment, his anger warring with something that looked almost like shame. Get out, he said, suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. What? Bill wasn't sure he had heard correctly. I said get out, Jimmy repeated, his voice now rising to a shout. Get out of my studio. Bill looked at him with what appeared to be genuine sadness rather than anger. Jimmy, I'm sorry this went the way it did. I really am. Don't apologize to me, Jimmy snapped, but his voice lacked the venom it had carried earlier. I'm not apologizing for defending myself, Bill clarified. I'm apologizing because I can see that you're in pain about something, and instead of dealing with that pain constructively, you've chosen to try to inflict it on someone else. The observation was so accurate and so compassionately delivered that it seemed to drain all the fight out of Jimmy. He stood behind his desk looking smaller somehow, diminished by his own cruelty. I don't need your pity, Jimmy said weakly. It's not pity, Bill replied as he began walking toward the exit. It's recognition. I recognize someone who's struggling with their own demons, their own insecurities. I've played enough troubled characters to understand the signs. As Bill reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time, his expression carrying no anger, no resentment, just genuine concern for another human being who was clearly suffering. Jimmy, whatever is eating at you, whatever is making you feel like you need to attack people who haven't hurt you, I hope you find a way to deal with it that doesn't involve causing pain to others. Don't lecture me about causing pain, Jimmy called after him, but his voice was hollow now, defeated. I'm not lecturing you, Bill replied gently. I'm just hoping you find some peace. Because this, he gestured at the hostile confrontation they had just endured. This isn't going to give you whatever it is you're looking for. With that, Bill Skarsgård walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a studio full of shocked audience members, bewildered crew, and a host who looked like a man confronting the ugliness of his own reflection for the first time. The cameras kept rolling as Jimmy stood alone behind his desk, the silence stretching on until he finally managed to look into the camera. We'll be right back, he said, but his voice carried none of its usual confidence, and everyone knew that something fundamental had changed in that studio. So what do you think really drove Jimmy Kimmel to launch such a vicious attack on an actor who had never given him any reason for hostility? Was it professional jealousy, personal insecurity, or something even deeper? Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think makes someone turn their platform into a weapon against innocent guests.